Yo, what's going on, guys? It is time for another reaction video, and today we're going to be reacting to the history of Belize, and this is coming from the YouTube channel Real Politic. So if you like this video, make sure to go check out that YouTube channel as well. Let's get straight into it.
Between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, nomadic hunter-gatherers crossed the Bering Strait, beginning a generations-long journey south through the Americas. By 1600 BC, the dense tropical forests of the Yucatan Peninsula were settled by their descendants, a people who would become known as the Mayans. The mythical and mysterious Mayan civilization was once a large collection of city-states in Mesoamerica, composed of over 70 distinct languages, but unified by ancestry, religion, and culture. These groups interacted through a complex network of trade routes, alliances, and rivalries. They fought epic, large-scale wars against each other, and frequently enslaved or sacrificed captured soldiers from other Mayan tribes. But even by ancient standards, the Mayans were far from being primitive or underdeveloped. Archaeological records prove that they were extraordinary mathematicians and astronomers. They built breathtaking pyramids, temples, palaces, and plazas that stood the test of time. They had a unique writing system, composed of hieroglyphics and used for a variety of records and stone carvings. There were at least 2 million Mayans during the peak of the classical period, at around 600 AD. Mayan society rivaled that of other significant ancient cultures by virtually every metric. But at around 800 AD, Mayans abandoned the Yucatan Peninsula. Their greatest cities were deserted. This mass exodus has long perplexed historians, and to this day, its causes are unknown. Perhaps it was a drought, or a major war. But whatever it was, one thing was certain. The Mayans never again reached the heights of civilization seen.
It still amazes me that all of these places all over the world had these pyramid-type structures all around the same time, but it was, I think, pretty much impossible for them to have ventured from one continent to another at that era. I could be mistaken, but regardless, it's just really strange that everybody has similar structures all over the world being so far apart from one another. I've been to Belize once, had an amazing time while I was there. I went to Keycocker, which is just like a small island, but I didn't get to go to any of the structures like what we're seeing right now. But I do hope to visit Belize again sometime and get to see some of this in person.
One thing was certain. The Mayans never again reached the heights of civilization seen during their classical era. But contrary to some popular misconceptions, they did not just vanish entirely. Their civilization continued on for hundreds of years, albeit in a state of undeniable decline. The expedition of Christopher Columbus in 1492 shifted the tides of world history forever. The Spanish brought with them guns, horses, disease, and Christianity. A mere 50 years after landing at the shores of a continent later called America, most of its land was already claimed as part of the Spanish Empire. Their aggressive invasion left unspeakable death, destruction, and some might argue, genocide in its path. But the Mayans proved to be a more challenging foe than Spain was expecting. Their decentralized network of cities and relentless adherence to cultural tradition made them difficult to conquer. It wasn't until the 1700s that the remaining Mayan strongholds fell for good. Almost the entire New World had been conquered by Spain come the mid-1500s, but such vast stretches of land were impossible to control in practice. British pirates were a particular nuisance on the seas. They raided Spanish ports and trade routes, robbed cargo ships in the Caribbean, and stole logwood, the area's most abundant resource. The pirates, called buccaneers, were not formally controlled by the Crown, allowing London a degree of plausible deniability concerning their actions. But there was no mistaking that, with or without direct involvement, buccaneers aided British interests. A group of buccaneers, known as baymen, pushed the limits of Spain's territorial claim. They settled along the Bay of Honduras in 1638, defiantly founding Belize town. The settlement, primarily made of woodcutters, continued to grow in size. Their presence infuriated the Spanish. A series of conflicts and treaties further legitimized the Belize settlement as decades went on, even as nearby Spanish colonists attempted invasion half a dozen times during the 1700s. Britain, seeing vast potential in mahogany as a source of commerce, imported African slaves from nearby Caribbean colonies to work as laborers. In 1798, the Spanish sent their biggest force yet, an army of 2,000 soldiers by sea, and fought the Baymen and their slaves in the Battle of St. George's Caye. British victory was so decisive that Spain never attempted to reclaim the area again. The victory at St. George's Caye paved the way for Belize's continued development. Population grew at a faster pace, and larger towns were constructed in wake of amplified activity.
One of the things that I thought was pretty unique about Belize that I wasn't aware of prior to visiting there is that was, in fact, when I learned that it was previously owned by, or owned? It was part of the British colony until they got their independence. But most of the people in Belize speak English. And so I didn't know that until I visited there. They do have their own language as well that would probably be something similar to like Creole is here in the U.S., which is like in Louisiana, south area of the U.S. But it was convenient to be able to visit somewhere and communicate pretty openly because pretty much everybody spoke English.
Growth was mainly motivated by the lumber industry, but as years went on, wood exports sunk to increasingly lower levels, and Belize's lack of economic diversification made the settlement vulnerable to recession. Bitter disagreement on how to tackle this economic crisis created a rift between landowners, who controlled the forestry industry, and merchants who controlled trade. Landowners advocated an increase in tariffs, while the merchants preferred to increase land tax. Naturally, each faction opposed the other vehemently. Such bitter disagreement in the midst of worsening economic conditions led to greater intervention from London. In 1862, Belize was declared a crown colony and renamed to British Honduras. The dispute between landowners and merchants therefore became irrelevant overnight.
British Honduras.
Just over a decade later, in 1875, half of all land in the territory was owned by the Belize Estate and Produce Company, a London-based corporation that would hold significant influence in the colony over the next century. Their rise signified the end of the old settler elite. In 1931, a hurricane destroyed nearly all of Belize town, killed thousands, and started off an even worse decade, which devastated the wood industry.
I believe this is the hurricane that split the island in half of I don't know if you say Key or Key, but I think it's pronounced Key Calker, which is where I got to visit when I was in Belize. Matter of fact, I'll try to make sure to put the video from my visit to Belize up there so you guys can check it out. But the hurricane split the island in two. And so one part of the island is pretty much abandoned with the exception of maybe like one or two really small structures, like maybe somebody lives there or something like that. And all of the other is on the larger side of the island. But this hurricane devastated Belize pretty bad.
Due to the global Great Depression, growing groups of Creole and Mestizo demanded political representation and began to organize around nationalist pro-worker movements like the People's Unity Party. Political reform gained Britain's blessing by the middle of the 20th century. In 1954, the PUP won 66% of the vote in Belize's first parliamentary elections, and George Price became Belize's first prime minister. British Honduras was renamed into Belize in the 1970s and governed autonomously from that point forward. But official independence was still complicated by a territorial dispute with neighboring Guatemala, which stretched back to the 1800s. A tense standoff at the Belize-Guatemala border ended in 1981 when the UN General Assembly passed a resolution supporting Belizean independence, and Belize finally became its own independent country.
Oh, pause. That was a good video. It was quite quick, but it was I kind of liked the pacing of it better because it didn't drag it out. It kind of went through all the milestones and the history, most of it anyhow. And I retract what I was saying about not being able to go from one continent to another, because obviously you could, but I feel like those structures were built before people were even doing that, before people were even exploring and going across seas and oceans to other continents. So that's what I think's unique about it. I don't really necessarily buy into the whole show called Ancient Aliens, but I do think it's kind of interesting to see the theories that come up from that show, and that, you know, something else inspired that architecture. Yeah, anyways, that's a small part of what this video is about. I'll make sure again to put the video up there from my visit to Belize if you care to check it out. And if you are new here to my YouTube channel, please subscribe, click the bell so you'll get notified every time I upload a new video. If you're watching this from Belize and there's some stuff in the history that he either got incorrect or maybe didn't mention, please let me know that in the comments. And if you've ever gotten to visit Belize, tell me where you got to go, what kind of adventures you went on, what kind of excursions you did. Did you go snorkeling? Did you go swimming with stingrays or dolphins or any of that kind of stuff? Yeah, and in general, let me know wherever you're watching this from in the world. I'm always interested to see where my viewers are. I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.